This year will mark 50 years since a young British Liberal politician secured a private member's bill in the House of Commons seeking to decriminalise abortion.
Before the passing of the Act, abortion was illegal, but people got round that in various ways. You could go to an unqualified operator, or you could engage in activity which would result in self-abortion.
I tried to insert a knitting needle. I had no idea where to direct it, and I didn't care if I punctured something apart from the womb. I was in such a state of mind where I just didn't care.
I mean, it was appalling that we had this death rate annually. Between 30 and 50 women a year died as a result of criminal abortion.
She had a syringe. She boiled some Dettol water and carbolic soap, and she put some other substance in it which she wouldn't tell me what it was. And she syringed my womb out. It was the most agonising pain that I've ever experienced.
David Steele's 1967 Abortion Act was a major moment, not just in Britain, but around the world. Soon other countries were changing their laws, and many would go much further than the UK.
I believe very strongly that the passage of the abortion bill was a sign that Britain was moving into a much more civilised and humane society. But gradually our neighbouring countries changed their law, and with the sole exception of Ireland, I think all the neighbouring countries have got much freer law than we have.
The focus from the very beginning was on women, their experience, their bodies. And paramount in the legislation was that as long as a termination was supported by two medical professionals, it was their choice alone, and not to be in any way influenced, in the law at least, by the views of a male partner. Though David, now Lord Steele, does remember the role of men being part of the debate as the bill passed through Parliament 5 decades ago.
There were various amendments which were floated to try to make it a requirement that the man should be consulted. These amendments were all rejected because it was too difficult to pin that down in law.
But while the law has never extended any rights in the decision-making process to men, should we recognise at the very least that men are affected by abortion and that they may need support to help them through the experience in both the short and the longer term?
Of course, it's much better that the partner should be consulted and counselled as well as the woman concerned. And that's just good practice.
In reality, that so-called good practice isn't necessarily regular practice, as abortion providers acknowledge. Here's Vix Proctor of the Marie Stopes organisation.
We support women around all their pregnancy choices. They've booked their appointment. They go in to have an assessment with the nurse. The nurse talks them through it. The nurse is very emotionally sort of open for the woman to talk to them about anything that they feel is concerning them or worrying them. And the man sat in the waiting room. There's him and a phone and BBC Sport.
But do men really need support through the experience of abortion? Don't most just go along with their partner's decision? Aren't many, especially young men, quite simply relieved not to have to be burdened with the responsibility of parenthood so early? Now, that's definitely a perception and I'm sure many of you recognise. But is that really the case with most men? In the UK alone, around 200,000 legal abortions are carried out every year. It's said that 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in their lifetime. That's an awful lot of women affected, whether positively or negatively, by the experience. And logic would suggest, therefore, that there's a similar number of men, though there's no legal requirement for them to be told, who've been touched in some way by the decision to go through with a termination. Michael Simon, a psychotherapist working with men in the United States, says that in his experience, because the issue is often framed as female-only territory, men have come to sideline themselves and their feelings.
Men understand at a certain level that women are going through a very different experience when they're deciding about what to do with their body and whether or not to continue a pregnancy, and that men will often decide to give over their right to have feelings or thoughts about it in favor of their female partner. They feel like they're actually trying to take care of her. And so if they have more attention put on them, or if they have ambivalent feelings or a different feeling than their partner, what they decide in order to be a good man is that they will not talk about their experiences so that the woman can have the majority of care and attention that he believes that his female partner needs.
Men who feel happy and comfortable talking about their experience of abortion are difficult to find. Of those that do express their feelings, some talk of relief, many are ambivalent, but others talk of being severely affected in some way. Well, as part of this programme, I've managed to talk to several men about their experiences of abortion.
So look here, Linka. Look over here. Look at that. You see the little pig? He got in the butter churn.
Tony is 39 and happily married. He works and lives in Berkshire with his wife and 2 children, a 4-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl. Tony clearly enjoys being a dad, but when he was in his 20s, he supported his then partner through a termination.
You know, that moment where you realize you're going to be a father, there's a lot of thoughts that come into your mind. Like, one, is she really pregnant? Is this actually happening? Number 2 is thinking, wow, I'm going to be a dad and all of the responsibility that comes with that. And then that was complicated by, you know, when she told me that she was pregnant, she said also that she had wanted to get an abortion. And it just struck me and I just, just froze.
In those couple of weeks after the abortion, did you discuss the abortion?
A couple of times. I mean, we tried to avoid it as much as we could, I think, in the very beginning. I do remember a conversation that we had, and she was saying, like, I know that a lot of women feel after an abortion, but she said she felt relieved afterwards, you know. And so in that sense that she felt that it had helped her.
She said, in a word, she was relieved after the abortion. Which word, single word, would describe how you felt?
Empty, at a loss, just cold, I think is the best word. If you think of a dark cave, or I thought of myself as being in the middle of an ocean with waves just towering, like dark, shadowy waves in a thunderstorm. That's what came to my mind, you know, because it's kind of up and down. Well, it's very much up and down as you try to make sense of this. And sometimes you think you're all right. Other times you're just tugged beneath the water, you know, trying to be supportive to her and also trying to make sense of what was in my own mind. That left deep scars.
One man who spoke to us has been through the abortion process 3 times over a 30-year period. Peter, not his real name, is now in his 60s.
My attitude has always been it's the woman's decision because it's her body and it's up to her, and I would not put any pressure on at all. If she wanted to have the child, I would have been there to support and whatever was necessary.
When she had the termination, were you there? Were you involved?
I picked her up. I remember doing that, but it was a very difficult time.
How did you feel, though, the day that the pregnancy was terminated?
It's difficult. I felt for her terribly.
But what about yourself?
I don't know. I think I was very good at being stiff upper lip. But subsequently, I think about how old the child would be now. Regularly, I think, actually, I could have a 30-year-old. I could have a 25-year-old each year. I could have a 20-year-old now. I wonder what I'd be doing. It would be a completely different situation because I would have married her. And then I wouldn't have gone through the subsequent events that occurred in my life. I went out with a girl who informed me that she didn't need to take contraception. During that period, she got pregnant.
What happened with that termination? Were you involved?
No.
No. Why not? Were you asked? Did you not want to?
No, I wasn't asked.
At this point, this had happened to you twice. What were you thinking about children?
Well, I was thinking, would I ever have a child?
Did you want one?
Oh, hugely. My child, my 8-year-old, is a source of complete and utter joy.
But you didn't know that at the time. You didn't know that that this is what children would be. That they would be this joy.
Knowing me, creating a little person who's a bit like me is such a joy.
For people listening to this who perhaps still have no idea, what might be the feelings that a man who's gone through a termination, what might those feelings be?
confusion, an element of yearning as to what might have been, particularly having then had children. But I think one of the things we haven't spoken about was the fact that I have not spoken to anybody about this ever. I brought it up once recently. People wanted to come somehow sweep it under the carpet with me. They were slightly embarrassed that I'd brought this up.
So hang on, take me through a typical conversation. How would it go?
Well, I don't know. I just, have you had any children before? No, I haven't. I've had, been 3 terminations in my life. Oh, really? Anyway, so what are you doing later on? It's almost as if it's taboo. You can't really talk about that. Whereas I'd quite like to talk about it. I'd be quite willing to talk about it, you know.
Doesn't that surprise you? Because if you've tried to talk to, you know, a lot of people, the chances are that some other man has gone through the same thing, but they still don't want to talk about it. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I just... perhaps it's my fault. Perhaps I've not been very willing to emotionally unburden myself.
What about family?
My father died before any of this. My mother, who was a wonderful human being, died 3 years ago.
Did she know?
I didn't tell her.
About any of them?
No.
Why?
Because she wanted me to have a child.
Oh. And you thought it would upset her?
Yeah. Yeah.
Another man, we'll call him Robert, told me his story.
I was in a relationship with my then girlfriend, now wife, and we had been going out for about 1.5 years. We'd been using barrier contraception, and we were part of the 0.01% where it failed. I was very much in love with my girlfriend, but I was questioning whether I was going to be here long term in London. We were very quick to have a conversation about it, and I think fortunately for both of us, we were on the same page that we hadn't been together as long as we would have wanted to. We weren't married. She knew about my situation personally, so I think I was probably an unsure gig. So the decision was quite quick to not go ahead with the birth. Yeah.
You guys went ahead and you had your termination. Were you there for it? Were you there after it?
Yeah, I went with her, and she was also supported by another friend at the time. But I do remember that I want to say that she was a nurse, but I can't remember her designation. She was very surprised that I was there. She initially thought that I was a friend. And then I said, no, I'm the boyfriend. And she said, we don't often see you guys. So that was quite interesting. There was offers of support to my girlfriend. The nurse took us through the process. She was good at addressing both of us equally, even though there was probably more shock on her behalf that I was there than this had all happened in the first place. And then after that, there was no further involvement towards me.
Now, you said that counselling was given to your girlfriend at the time, but, you know, nothing was given to you. And it sounds like you didn't need it, but other men, you know, might.
Broadly speaking, men's mental health is a topic that we don't talk about very much, whether it's about this particular issue or about other issues. I'm not suggesting that we favour men's mental health and emotional well-being over women's mental health and well-being, but that there should be a greater degree of parity.
And what do you think that would involve?
When you're going through a transition period like this, as we were, because this was also impacting our relationship at the time, it was making us see ourselves in a very different light. I think that that's always an opportunity for a service to engage with a potential user or client. And I think that that's a good starting point. But I also think that there needs to be a bit more strength in the way that the message is passed, and more discussion about the potential fallout from something like this, because the default position is I'm fine. What they want to do is get out of there because they're feeling uncomfortable. But it's at that moment that somebody says, no, are you really all right? You know, and this is what you might experience. And this is what you might go through individually and as a couple. This is what might happen 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Have you given consideration to all of this?
Denise Knowles is a psychosexual therapist with Relate. She has almost 30 years' experience helping couples deal with a breakdown or tackling difficulties or tensions in their relationships.
The idea of becoming a parent is really quite strong and very emotive for many young men as well as older men. And one of the things that we've got to be very careful about here is not just blanketing all men with this sort of I'm not bothered, it doesn't matter kind of attitude. I'll get through this, I'm strong, I'm the man, I'm not meant to be emotional. Because a lot of young men actually do see themselves as being potentially good dads. So when the opportunity to become a dad, for however it doesn't come about, happens, then they are just going to be in that same place, that emotional place of loss, of grief, and actually sometimes quite confused as well. One of the interesting things that I have noticed is that actually at the time of the abortion, perhaps the man is a little bit more strong or reserved in the way that he may react or not react, often be there to help his partner through the situation, be in support of her. And then later on, it's almost like, wow, gosh, now it's my turn. You know, this has hit me like a ton of bricks. And that sort of grief out of context or apparently out of context can be very, very difficult for people to cope with. They can become depressed, they can be very angry, they can be extraordinarily upset. Sometimes shock will get in there as well. So actually there is a whole range of emotions. Then sometimes a little bit of shame and sometimes disgust can get mixed in there.
In the 50 years since David Steele's historic act decriminalising abortion in most of the UK and changes in the law to allow abortion in many other countries, there have only been a handful of studies anywhere in the world into the psychological impact of abortion on men. Academics often steer clear of the subject for fear they'll be misinterpreted as furthering a pro-life or pro-choice agenda, depending on the extent of their findings. But while the research is sparse, some people have put their head above the parapet. One of them is Professor Arthur Szostak. Openly pro-choice in his views on abortion, he carried out by far the biggest study yet into how men are affected.
We discovered that men wanted the opportunity to discuss their experience at the time. The hour and a half or so that they spend in the waiting room, men would very much have welcomed a discussion group run by clinic staffers where the men could speak out the emotional turmoil, the emotional experience they were having, and learn from one another how they had resolved any uncertainty on their part and how they had come to be the support person that they were in that clinic waiting room. So that was a major finding. Men wanted counseling.
Psychotherapist Michael Simon says the men who come to see him at his clinic in New Orleans present with a range of issues which can often be traced back to their experience of abortion.
What they're dealing with for the most part is things like a loss of interest in sex or long-standing erectile dysfunction or addiction to pornography, or that they find that they just socialize much less than they used to when they were in college, which happens to be right around the time, say, that the abortion happened, or that they started drinking or using more drugs. But mainly what they're dealing with, and I think this was sort of the focus of my work, was that they're experiencing a kind of unconscious guilt. We all need to grieve. I like to say that living is grieving. We are always dealing with loss. And if we cannot fully deal with loss, it comes out in other ways. And I think survivor guilt is one big reason why men still don't come forward about it.
I think a very small percent of men, I would estimate 8 or 9% of the universe of men that go through the abortion experience are left with an obsession with the child that might have been. Some of those men never quite get over that. I've interviewed men who mark years later the date of that particular abortion experience and mark it with mournfulness.
So how do women feel about how men deal with the abortion experience? I met up with two who've been through 2 terminations each themselves, journalists Felicity Morse and Nikki Hodgson.
Both of the men, the first thing they said was, well, it's your decision, you can make it. And I felt like that was the thing they had been taught to say, that good boys say in this situation. So don't pressure her to do anything that she doesn't want to do. And I think after that point, there was a kind of separation from me, from the issue itself, an emotional separation, almost like they were scared to go there. So they didn't want to say the wrong thing. And I was scared to ask.
Nikki, I'm wondering how similar or not was your experience?
The first one was relatively straightforward. And when I say that, I mean abortion's never easy, but I was very young. I was with a boyfriend whom I loved very much and he was a great communicator. We talked about it and it was obviously what I wanted to do and he was obviously going to support it, and our relationship, it didn't affect our relationship in any way actually. But I do remember I had the pill abortion the first time, and I remember when I had to take the second pill and my boyfriend was coming to drive me to the appointment. He'd gone out the night before and got completely trashed. And that was obviously his coping mechanism because he was not a drinker. And we never really talked about that at the time, and then we just carried on. And I completely agree with Felicity. It's like there's no outlet for men to talk about these things or even to process their own emotions around it. And I think Felicity's just so right saying that idea of like the good boy, like the line that he comes out with the first time because that's what they've been told to say. But because they've just been told to say that, they don't think about anything else that goes on underneath. And there'll be all kinds of things coming up for them.
What I hated about that phrase being trotted out was this feeling that, like, it's all on you now. You make the decision. It's your responsibility. It's up to you. I've done my bit by letting you make that decision.
How could this be made better? What do you think, Nikki?
I think if a good abortion provider could come up with some really practical instructions and questions for men to ask themselves, and also maybe some talking points for their, like little notes for them to go through with their partner, just create like flashcards almost. It sounds really basic, but I think like if you could just give some men a starting point, that might help.
Some people, of course, are not so keen on a more inclusive approach to helping men through the abortion experience. And one of them is UK newspaper columnist and feminist campaigner Sarah Dittam.
If we're talking about what accommodation institutions, so abortion providers or the NHS, should be making for men to discuss their feelings, I don't feel like they should be doing any more than they're doing already. The more you involve men, the more you take the focus away from women. You stop talking about this as a decision that a woman has to make with all the physical, economic, social and ethical considerations that she is going to put into that decision. And you're suddenly allowing this other person, who is in a physical sense very much a junior partner in the whole baby-making process, to be involved in that decision. You're kind of embracing him within the discussion. And that really shouldn't be our default.
I mean, involved is an interesting word because there's a whole spectrum of involvement, isn't there? There might be men who want to control every aspect of your life, and there may be men who just want to talk about it, talk about how they're feeling. It's well, I mean, you talked about they're having a junior involvement. I mean, it's quite a big involvement, really. It's without that, in many circumstances, the pregnancy wouldn't happen. So, isn't it important to talk about it?
I think it is for men to form the relationships and the environments in which they can have those conversations. That can include book an appointment with your GP and go and say, I want to understand what someone I love is going through this. Please explain to me what it is and what it means, and I need to have a conversation about it. But the feelings of the man are not and never should be the focus of a woman's journey through abortion.
I don't think anyone's saying that it's the focus. It's just part of it.
There's a sort of an inexorable slippage that happens. The more you talk about how men feel, the more the feelings of men become the centre of the conversation. Only women can have abortions. Only women have to deal with the, huge, potentially fatal consequences of going through with a pregnancy. It's not the job of an abortion provider to lay on counselling for a man. It's the job of an abortion provider to work for the woman and to support the woman's choices.
So how do the abortion service providers in the UK perceive men?
What support is out there for men at the moment, and there isn't much. We are very much around proactively giving health information that can make a really well-informed decision. And, you know, these days relationships are very much based around two opinions, not one. And that means that sometimes when that man sat in that waiting room, he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know what's being discussed in the assessment, and he doesn't know what's going on in the treatment room. So it's maybe an information thing. It's basing it around the fact that if we sort of put the information out there on what to expect on the day, you know, that's something that he can read and be more prepared about. And also aftercare, you know, when they go home together, he knows what to expect and he knows how his partner's going to be feeling, and that prepares him a bit more.
Vix Proctor from Mari Stopes thinks there should be a campaign to raise awareness of abortion services, to tackle stigma and support men as well as women.
I definitely think it's a great one, actually, for us all to sort of come together and maybe do a national campaign that shows that it is okay to talk and that men can be included in that conversation. And you know, traditionally it is around women because it's women who will go through the treatment. But who's to say that we can't, you know, encourage mental well-being through open conversation and relationship building around being open about, you know, very emotional situations like having an abortion.
There does need to be some more research, and I would perhaps like to do some research. I think BPAS is really well placed to be able to talk to couples at the time during the abortion process.
Michael Neville is Director of Nursing at BPAS, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service.
We have made over the sort of the last few years much more of a concerted effort to include partners in the abortion pathway, and I think that these services are evolving. As long as we're making sure that there's no coercion, then I absolutely believe that partners should be involved where women want them to be involved. I'm not saying that men or women won't sometimes have some issues post-abortion, but I think it's a very small number of people. We do offer post-abortion counselling to women at any time after, and I can't imagine that would be any different, that men would perhaps want to have some of that counselling years later. But it isn't something that we get asked for, and it's not something that's currently funded by the NHS.
How we should help men through abortion is a difficult discussion to have, as we've heard. The subject itself is still taboo and hugely controversial. Abortion is still framed almost exclusively as female territory. No wonder some men don't want to raise how they feel about it. We're approaching the 50th anniversary of a historic decision to decriminalise abortion in most of the UK. I hope it doesn't take another 50 years for men who've been affected by abortion